Alright, this is part 50 of Nos4a2. The other side of the door. Bing Partridge stood at the spy hole. In his left hand was the doorknob. In his right was the gun, the .38 Mr. Mannix had brought from Colorado. Boy, go away, Bing whispered, his voice tiny and strained with need. Come again some other day. Bing had a plan, a simple but desperate plan. When the boy reached the top of the steps, he would throw open the door and pull him into the house. Bing had a can of gingerbread smoke in his pocket, and as soon as he had the kid inside, he could gas him out. And if the kid began screaming, if the kid screamed and struggled to get free, someone was having a barbecue down at the end of the block, kids in the front yard chucking a frisbee, grown-ups drinking too much and laughing too loud and getting sunburned. Bing might not be the sharpest knife in the kitchen, but he was no fool either. Bing thought a man in a gas mask with a pistol in one hand might attract some notice wrestling with a screaming child. And there was the dog. What if the dog lunged? It was a St. Bernard, big as a bear cub. If it got its big bear cub head in through the door, Bing would never be able to force it back out. It would be like trying to hold the door shut on a herd of cattle. Mr. Mannix would know what to do, but he was asleep. He had been asleep for more than a day now, was resting in Sigmund Dezot's bedroom. When he was awake, he was his good old self, good old Mr. Mannix. But when he nodded off, it sometimes seemed he would never wake again. He said he would be better when he was on his way to Christmasland, and Bing knew that it was true, but he had never seen Mr. Mannix so old, and when he slept it was like seeing him dead. And what if Bing forced the boy into the house? Bing was not sure he could wake Mr. Mannix when he was like he was. How long could they hide here before Victoria McQueen was out on the street screaming for her child, before the cops were going door to door? It was the wrong place and the wrong time. Mr. Mannix had made it clear they were only to watch for now, and even Bing, who was not the sharpest pencil in the desk, could see why. This sleepy street was not sleepy enough, and they would only get one pass at the whore with her whore tattoos and her lying whore mouth. Mr. Mannix had made no threats, but Bing knew how much this mattered to him, and understood what the penalty would be if he fucked it up. Mr. Mannix would never take Bing to Christmasland. Never, 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 never. The boy climbed the first step, and the second. I wish I may, I wish I might. First star I see tonight, Bing whispered, and shut his eyes and readied himself to act. Have the wish I wish tonight. Go the fuck away, you little bastard, we're not ready. He swallowed rubber-tasting air and cocked the hammer on the big pistol. And then someone was in the street shouting for the boy, shouting, No, Wayne, no! Bing's nerve endings throbbed, and the gun came dangerously close to slipping out of his sweaty hand. A big silver boat of a car rolled down the road, spokes of sunshine flashing off the rims. It was pulled to a halt directly in front of Victoria McQueen's house. The window was down, and the driver hung one flabby arm out, waving it at the kid. Yo, he shouted again. Yo, Wayne. Yo, not no. Bing was in such a state of nervous tension that he had heard him wrong. What's up, dude? Yelled the fat man. Dad, the child yelled. He forgot all about climbing the steps and knocking on the door, turned and ran down the path, his fucking pet bear galloping alongside. Bing seemed to go boneless. His legs were wobbly with relief. He sank forward, resting his forehead against the door, and shut his eyes. When he opened them and looked through the spy hole, the child was in his father's arms. The driver was morbidly obese, a big man with a shaved head and telephone pole legs. That had to be Louis Camaraderie, the father. Bing had read up about the family online, had a general sense of who was who, but had never seen a picture of the man. He was amazed. He could not imagine Camaraderie and McQueen having sex. The fat beast would split her in two. Bing wasn't exactly buff, but he'd look like a fucking track star next to Camaraderie. He wondered what hold the man had on her to have induced her to have sex with him. Perhaps they had come to financial terms. Bing had looked the woman over at length and would not be surprised. All those tattoos. A woman could get any tattoo she liked, but they were all the same. But they all said the same thing. They were a sign reading, available for rent. The breeze caught the papers the boy had been looking at, and they drifted under the fat man's car. When Camaraderie set his child back on the ground, the boy looked around for them and spotted them, but didn't get down on all fours to retrieve them. Those papers worried Bing. They meant something. They were important. A scared, scrawny, junking-looking lady had brought those papers and tried to force them to McQueen. Bing had watched the whole thing from behind the curtain in the front room. Victoria McQueen didn't like the junkie lady. She yelled at her and made ugly faces. She threw the papers back at her. Their voices had carried, not well, but well enough for Bing to hear one of them say, "Mannix." Bing had wanted to wake Mr. Mannix up, but you couldn't wake him up when he was like he was. Because he isn't really asleep, Bing thought, then shoved the unhappy notion aside. He had been in the bedroom once to look at Mr. Mannix lying on top of the sheets wearing nothing but boxer shorts. A gray V was cut into his chest and held shut with coarse black thread. It was partially healed, but seeped pus and pink blood was a glistening canyon in his flesh. Bing had stood listening for minutes, but did not hear him breathe once. Mr. Mannix's mouth lolled open, exuding the slightly cloying, slightly chemical odor of formaldehyde. His eyes were open, too, dull, empty, staring at the ceiling. Bing had crept close to touch the old man's hand, and it had been cold and stiff as that of any corpse, and Bing had gripped it with the sickening certainty that Mr. Mannix was gone. But then Mannix's eyes had moved, just slightly, turning to fix on Bing, to stare at him without recognition, and Bing had retreated. Now that the crisis was past, Bing let his shaky, weak legs carry him back to the living room. He stripped off his gun mask and sat down with Mr. and Mrs. Dezote to watch TV with them. Needed some time to recover himself. He held old Mrs. Dezote's hand. He watched game shows and now and then checked the street, keeping an eye on the McQueen place. A little before 7, he heard voices and a door banged shut. He returned to the front door and watched from the spy hole. The sky was a pale shade of nectarine, and the boy and his grotesquely fat father were wandering across the yard to the rent-a-car. "We're at the hotel if you need us," Camaraderie called to Victoria McQueen, who stood on the steps of the house. Bing didn't like the idea of the boy leaving with the father. The boy and the woman belonged together. Mannix wanted them both, and so did Bing. The boy was from Mannix, and the woman was Bing's treat, someone he could have some fun with in the house of sleep. Just looking at her thin, bare legs made his mouth dry. One last bit of fun in the house of sleep, and then it was on to Christmasland with Mr. Mannix, on to Christmasland forever and ever. But no, there was no reason to get in a sweat. Bing had looked at all the mail in Victoria McQueen's mailbox and had found a bill for a day camp in New Hampshire. The kid was registered there through August. It was true, Bing was probably a few clowns short of the full circus, but he didn't think anyone was going to sign their kid up for a camp that cost $8,000 a week, and then just decided to blow it off. Tomorrow was the 4th of July. The father was probably just here to see the child for the holiday. The father and the son drove away, leaving behind the unholy ghost of Victoria McQueen. The papers under the car, the ones that Bing wanted so badly to see, were grabbed by the Buick's slipstream and tumbled after it. Victoria McQueen was leaving too. She went back into the house but left the door open, and 3 minutes later she came out with her car keys in one hand and sacks for the grocery store in the other. Bing watched her until she was gone, and then watched the street some more and finally let himself out. The sun had gone down, leaving an irradiated orange haze on the horizon. A few stars burned holes through the darkness above. There was a gas mask man, and he had a little gun. Bing sang to himself softly, what he did when he was nervous. And his bullets were made of lead, lead, lead. He went to the brook and shot Vic McQueen, right through the middle of her head, head, head. He walked up and down the curb, but could find only a single sheet of paper, crumpled and stained. Whatever he was expecting, it wasn't a photocopy of a news story about a man from Kentucky who had arrived at Bing's house 2 months ago in the Wraith, 2 days ahead of Mr. Mannix himself. Mr. Mannix had turned up, pale, starved-looking, bright-eyed, and bloody, in a Trans Am with zebra print upholstery and a big silver hammer propped next to him on the passenger seat. By then, Bing already had the plates back on the Wraith, and Nos4a2 was ready to roll. The Kentucky man, Nathan Dementor, had spent quite a while in the little basement room in the house of sleep before going on his way. Bing preferred girls, but Nathan Dementor knew just what to do with his mouth, and by the time Bing was done with him, they'd had many many long, meaningful, manly talks of love. It appalled Bing to see Nathan Dementor again in a photo accompanying an article titled Boeing Engineer Vanishes. It made his tummy hurt. He could not for the life of him imagine why the junkie woman had come to Victoria McQueen with such a thing. "Oh, boy," Bing whispered, rocking. Automatically he began to recite again. "There was a gas mask man, and he had a little gun, and his bullets were made of lead. That's not how it goes," said a small piping voice from behind him. Bing turned his head and saw a little blonde-headed girl on a pink bicycle with training wheels. She had drifted down from the barbecue at the end of the street. Adult laughter carried in the warm, humid evening. "My dad read me that one," she said. "There was a little man, and he had a little gun. He shoots a duck, right? Who's the gas mask man?" "Ooh," Bing said to her. "He's nice. Everybody loves him." "Well, I don't love him." "You would if you got to know him." She shrugged, turning her bike in a wide circle, and started back down the street. Bing watched her go, then returned to the Dezotes, clutching the article about Dementor, who was printed on stationery from some library in Iowa. Bing was sitting in front of the TV with the Dezotes an hour later when Mr. Mannix came out fully dressed in a silk shirt and tails and narrow-toed boots. His starved, cavernous face had an unhealthy sheen to it in the flickering blue shadows. "Bing," Mannix said, "I thought I told you to put Mr. and Mrs. Dezote in the spare room." "Well," Bing said, "they aren't hurting anyone." "No, of course they're not hurting anyone. They're dead, but there's no reason to have them underfoot either. For goodness sake, why are you sitting out here with them?" Bing stared for the longest time. Mr. Mannix was the smartest, most observant, thinkingest person Bing had ever met, but sometimes he didn't understand the simplest things. "Better than no company at all," he said.